Hello and welcome back to Property Matters on Dublin South FM and iProperty Radio with myself, Carol Tallon. You can contact us on social media at iProperty Radio or email hello@ipropertyradio.com. Joining us today is Igor Fleming, Managing Director of Dublin Lettings. Igor, you're very welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on.
Really, the rental market in Ireland is dominating news headlines, which is unusual at this time of year. Normally, we're coming into a whole range of pre-budget speculation, but I think the housing crisis, the rental crisis, has really coincided with the students getting their Leaving Cert results and looking for student accommodation right across the country. You're in Dublin. How are you finding the Dublin marketplace at the moment?
Oh, I think, like a lot of commentators have said, supply has never been tighter, and demand probably as strong as it's ever been. So inevitably, we're getting that pinch point of, prices rising and, insane demand, and all the problems that brings for obviously tenants, but also landlords and their agents.
And what parts of Dublin do you and your team deal with, or are you right across the city?
So we're pretty much across the whole greater Dublin area. So maybe as far south as Bray and as far north as Rush and Lust. And then, in some cases, we'll have other properties out in Selbridge and Leaksup. So pretty much the whole greater Dublin area.
Okay, but you're definitely coming into Wicklow and Kildare as well. So in terms of, obviously in recent weeks, we have seen across social media and particularly TikTok, we're seeing this these queues of rental accommodation where people are, number 70 in the queue to view a property.
Yeah.
Are these more extreme examples, or is this the norm now to rent in Dublin?
Well, I suppose it depends on the agent and how they manage their, viewing systems, what have you. For example, that example of these massive queues in Phibsborough or wheresoever it was, I presume that there was some sort of an open viewing arranged for that, where people were just told to arrive at a certain time and just take their chances, But there's lots of different methods that people might use to, minimize that sort of problem that obviously neighbors would have, tenants would have, feeling desperate to try and, get to see a place, never mind get the place itself, So I think, there are ways and means to lessen that impact from an agent's point of view, but also from the tenant's point of view as well, to improve their chances.
And maybe talk us through your the stock that you're dealing with, not just on the rentals, but also on the management side. Is it mainly houses or apartments, or who are your typical landlords?
Yeah, so like our clients would be, a wide variety, much like the rest of the industry, from your, people with the single property that might be a part of their pension, or their whole pension for that matter, accidental landlords who never meant to be landlords at all, who are, actually exiting the market now as it happens, but also your professional investors, people with multiple properties, corporates and pension funds as well, where they have to use an agent, to abide by revenue rules. But in the main, it's mainly apartments, houses, residential property. There's some commercial stock as well, but mainly residential property in the greater Dublin area.
Very good. You touched on two things there in the same sentence, and I'm wondering how connected are they really, in terms of the accidental landlords, and we know that there are many over the past decade and a half, people who might have bought starter homes, ended up in negative equity, and they themselves, while they're accidental landlords, they're also in many cases tenants themselves, because they're renting elsewhere in the country. And talk about them exiting. We know landlords exiting is a problem. We know that there has been a cohort of accidental or reluctant landlords. How connected are they in terms of, is it only the accidental landlords exiting, or is this a broader trend?
I think it's a broader trend. It started off with the accidental landlords who never really meant to be landlords, for whatever reason, family circumstances changing, for example, or changing jobs or moving, they couldn't afford to sell. So now the prices have begun to rise and they're possibly washing their face, they're getting out. But I think a lot of the problems also have to do with regulations, albeit that they were necessary. I think a lot of the problems are that the enforcement of the regulations are, being frank, not really being adhered to. To a large extent, you've got like the likes of the RTB, the Residential Tenancies Board, seems to be underfunded and understaffed and overworked. And with the best will in the world, they're trying to do a good job, but they're probably so snowed under with so many jobs and demands on their time that they just can't get things done as fast as they need to be, because when you've got a problem and you need to get it resolved, whether that's as a tenant or a landlord, you're hoping that it's done fairly promptly.
But this doesn't feel like a new problem. We know that the RTB has had its challenges in past years, and now this year we're at a stage where every rental property must be registered and re-registered every year. So
Yes.
how are we adding to this when already the flow wasn't great? And I suppose, look, I'm delighted that you talked about regulation and policy, because there was an article published in Australian media this morning, and it caught our eye because the headline was, is Australia following Ireland into a policy inflicted rental crisis? And it caught our attention because there's been a lot of speculation, and a lot of the industry would certainly, there's talk, there would be comments around our rental crisis being not just a mismatch of supply and demand, but there's been a huge policy input as well. Is that accurate?
Without a shadow of a doubt. And not to mention, has there been a huge policy change, but it's happening so quickly and so often. Even industry experts are finding it hard to keep up with, the changes that are happening. And you see it in the disputes that are happening between landlords and tenants. For a lot of people, I see, determination orders where, people just aren't aware of what, the changes in law have been and what dates they've changed. A lot of cases you've got law that changes, and then at least it changes in one fell swoop. So you have a chance to kind of look at that. But we've seen probably 4, 5, 6 different amendments to the Act over the past 3 or 4 years that have had huge impact on not to mention regulation, but also on the RTB and their operation of it.
We know that markets don't like uncertainty. How are your clients faring with this? Are you getting any, well, I was going to say feedback, but are you getting any even pushback on this?
Well, I suppose our clients are paying us to take care of things for them, but the reality is, though, that we have a job at hand to kind of keep up with the all these changes, and it's really is a full-time job, because you really need to keep close attention to all that's happening. I think our clients, in general, I find that people are just getting frustrated with the level and detail of changes that are happening. And I think that's certainly part of the reason why people are exiting the market. Not to mention, I think that's a smaller part to play, really, but it is just adding to the burden that people find as landlords, that they have to keep on top of all these changes and be aware of them. Now, regulation is good. Don't get me wrong. I think overall it's been a good thing for the market. It's certainly professionalized the rental market from when we started in the mid 90s doing this. It was a totally different type of rental market, albeit, and it was probably more sort of a mom and pop type market. Now there's a lot more professionalism involved. But you see, the problem is that people are it's an unequal market to a large extent as an investor, because if you're one of these persons who has 1 or 2 properties, if you're lucky enough to have that, then you find yourself paying, well, apart from anything else, you've been told that it's unearned income, which is a bit of a misnomer, really, because you're working hard, and then you're paying over half of that money back to the government. That's another thing that people don't talk about. Like, half of all rents go in tax back to the government. So
the RTB published some really interesting stats earlier this year, and I think they might have come as a surprise to people who aren't involved in the day-to-day. So, for example, when they talked about, I think it was somewhere between 80 and 83 or 80 and 85% of all landlords in Ireland own 1 or 2 properties, and the majority of those own 1, and the vast majority earn below €1,000 per month in investment. So actually, you're absolutely right. We need regulations. We want a more professional sector, and we want the interests of tenants protected. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
But the interests of landlords are certainly not being protected at the moment. And there seems to be a lack of balance. And where there's a lack of balance, how can you expect to keep both landlords and tenants in a marketplace? So in terms of balance, is this contributing to, I mean, I know we touched on accidental landlords, and there's so many reasons why they would be leaving. They never intended to be there in the first place. But people who did come in, maybe outside of pension investments, people who chose to become landlords and have maybe been doing it for decades, are they exiting?
Oh, without a shadow of doubt. You see, you talk about balance, and that was the balance between landlords and tenants and their rights and responsibilities. But there's also balance between landlords and the different types of landlords that there are. You know, so there's a different tax treatment for larger REITs, for example, and you know, institutional and corporate landlords, you know, effectively paying very little tax on the income, and as against your, you know, as you say, the vast majority of landlords are paying over half their income tax. You know, so there is a lack of balance there. That is definitely contributing to the exiting of landlords, and they are definitely exiting. Now, a certain number of them are being replaced by professional landlords from abroad, expatriate people and what have you, because they do see yield, you know, because rents are at record highs. But again, you've got that lack of balance in the market in itself. You've got the rent-controlled market versus the open market value, you know, which leads to two different effectively rental, you know, situations. And that is also contributing to, you know, these huge queues, because landlords are rightly, you know, because of rent controls, stuck to renting at lower rates that they had, you know, for example, with previous tenants. And you know, so the people see a property coming up, say a 2-bed property for 1,100, 1,200 euros a month in Dublin, and they're just thinking, my God, what's, you know, how in the name of God is that so cheap? Now, you know, that's not cheap in historical terms, but in today's market, it is. And so you've got hundreds and hundreds of people making inquiries from one property like that. Whereas that property on the open market could be, you know, 600, 700, 800 euros more a month.
You know, when you talk about rent controls versus the open market, people coming into the market for the first time, it seems bizarre that we're in a situation at the moment that rents on property owners are capped at multiples below what the cost of living and inflation increase are. Yeah. So actually their costs are rising at multiples of what they can increase the rent by. Is that a sustainable situation for any period of time?
No, and we're already seeing even some institutional landlords contact us and saying, our corporate landlords, professional landlords saying, this is totally unsustainable. How can I be in a situation where I can at maximum raise my rent by 2%, and yet suffer inflation at what, you know, running annually at 9%? You know, it just doesn't make sense.
In terms of the tax treatment, we know that this current government has acknowledged it, and I think agencies like Sherry Fitzgerald have been very vocal since about 2018, 2019 in chronicling the numbers of landlords leaving the market. It's something that's reported on every couple of months, and the government over the last 2 to 3 years have certainly acknowledged this. And up until a month ago, there seemed to have been a shift, a political shift, whereby there was an acknowledgement that while it's not politically palatable to do it, that there was an acknowledgement that there had to be something done to not just incentivize new landlords, private landlords and smaller non-professional landlords into the market, but actually to stem the flow of people leaving the market. However, over the past 4 weeks, 3 weeks really, we've had a political storm that has really turned against landlords, starting with Robert Troy and obviously Stephen Donnelly, and we know there's more to come. Yeah. And what that's teaching us is that not only is it politically unpalatable, but there seems to be a disconnect across media commentators and politically going out into the public, explaining how necessary all types and tenures of housing are to the marketplace to help solve the crisis or address the crisis, but also that actually we need all of these different types of landlords because they're each serving a different sector of the market. Yes. Is that what's gone wrong there, and how can we pull this back? Are you confident in budget 2023 that are you confident in seeing anything for smaller or private or non-institutional landlords in budget 2023?
Honestly, I don't think so. I think the the government's priority, I would imagine, is to increase supply, and I do believe supply is coming. And probably we're a couple of years out from supply having an impact on prices. Certainly from the rental market point of view. But then, of course, we're such an open economy, and with all that's going on in the world at the moment, who knows what might happen in the meantime. So but my gut feeling is there won't be much of a change in the tax treatment of smaller landlords. I think that there will be a lot of emphasis put on all of these new cost rental properties and what have you that are being rightly pushed at the moment. But then you see that brings its own issues with people objecting to properties being built in their areas and what have you. It's a very complicated situation. There's no quick fix to this at all. What will happen is what's happened in the past, that supply will increase over time and prices will start coming down. It's really the only answer.
In terms of changes we expect to see in budget 23, I think if we were having this conversation a month ago, I would have disagreed with you. Unfortunately, I think the last month, the timing of the latest backlash against landlords in Ireland has been really quite unfortunate. Tell me, are you seeing many new landlords, non-corporate landlords entering the Dublin market?
Yeah, so we see year on year out over the past possibly 8 or 7 or 8 years, a percentage of our clients exiting the market, but then that is generally being replaced by new landlords as well. So not a certain percentage of them would be people moving from other agencies or just taking on board an agent like ourselves, but then there are certainly people from abroad who are buying into the market in Ireland. That's probably slowed down a little bit this year with the war in Ukraine and the inflation shocks that have happened and interest rate rises, what have you. That's certainly having an impact. But yeah, there definitely is a more professional investor who has been buying into the Irish market. There's no doubt about that.
Okay, and that's an interesting one. Well, look, really, before we finish up today, I want to turn our attention to tenants who might be listening in here on Dublin South FM and on iProperty Radio, because again, we've referenced there the queues of people to see properties. Tenants are feeling very much out of control. The situation, they feel like they have very little control in this. What can tenants do when they are one in such a high number that it actually feels more like a lottery than an application?
Yeah, so there are certain things that they can do in advance of making applications for properties that will make life easier for them. And what they have to do is really think about things from the agent's point of view or from the landlord's point of view. When a landlord or an agent is faced with 100 inquiries for property, well, how do you stand out from the crowd? That's what you've got to think about. So really, the first thing you need to do is get all your ducks in order in relation to your documentation. If you're working, employment references, if you've rented before, previous landlord documentation, all in writing, all ready with the contact details of the people that the landlord or the agent wants to ring just to reconfirm. Have identity documentation. Really, what you need to do is kind of think about it, put yourself in their shoes and think about, how do I make my life or their life easier? Just so that I can stand out. In a sense, we sometimes get people from the States, and they're obviously much more used to this in the States, in a sense, putting a little bio together. This is who I am, this is where I'm coming from, this is what I want, this is our life, or whatever. Now, some people might feel difficult doing that and, in a sense, prostrating themselves in front of somebody, but really what they're doing is just making things easier, okay, for the agent to kind of stand out from the crowd. Another thing you could do is to literally physically call into the agency. Rather than making a phone call, we find it ourselves. When people call into the agency, you put a face to the name, you have developed some sort of a rapport with them, and you're remembered. And so, you will get on the list to see a property. Now, of course, the property may not suit you, or for whatever reason, but at least you'll get to see the property,
Are all properties being rented at the moment? Because I think that's a great idea in terms of the bio, because then you get a more complete picture of not just the applicant coming in, but their family and their family situation, or their whatever their living situation is, calling in. You're the first agent I've heard to say that, because I remember hearing about an estate agency in Waterford that were actually closing the doors of their office because of the number of applicants. So they were only dealing with online. So that's very unusual. I hope you won't be inundated now with people. Actually, do you find if people call in, are all properties going on the market? Because I would imagine it would be tempting if you have a property coming up and or you've developed rapport with 5, 6, 7 different prospective tenants. I can understand it would be tempting for you just to introduce those 5, 6, 7 tenants to a potential property. Does everything go on the open market?
No, not everything goes on the open market, because, ultimately what we're trying to do is find the best tenant for the property that suits them the best and suits, the property the best. So, if we have people who we have in our books who are looking for a particular property and one of them comes up, well, of course, we're going to show it to them or inform them of it, because ultimately, if you have people on your books who are going to match up with properties, well, then it does take the hassle and cost away from you to have to kind of advertise it, show it, and go through all of that, which you have to do in most cases. But if you can, yes, absolutely.
I'm always a proponent of prop tech and a different range of technologies, and I know that there are a number of Irish-based technology providers who have designed solutions to help busy letting agents sort through applicants. But I think your comments there are a reminder of how important the human touch is as well. And somebody calling in, building that relationship. And in a way, it almost sounds cynical, but it's not. It's a return to actually getting to know people in a way that is more difficult to do through paperwork. So that's a really interesting one. I appreciate you saying it. Just in terms of, before we finish up, because I know tenants are feeling so frustrated, if there's anybody here who is planning to move to Dublin for college within the coming weeks, or have an adult son or daughter moving to Dublin in the next couple of weeks, have you any tips for them? Any ray of hope for them? I know you mentioned new supply coming. It's not likely to be coming in the next month or two.
No, probably not. I suppose, oftentimes you find, particularly students are looking to minimize their monthly cost, which is understandable, obviously. But, in Dublin in particular, and what that means is they're looking for a larger accommodation. So 3, 4, 5 bedroom units, so that they can kind of put 6, 7, 8 people into it to kind of bring that price down. But those sort of properties are in very short supply. Traditionally you would have found, in apartment buildings, for example, the vast majority would be 2 bedrooms, and a smaller amount of 1 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms, very much smaller amount. So, to that end, 3 bedroom units in Dublin city centre are very hard to find as against your 2 beds. So if it's at all possible, and if, the landlord or agent is willing to, go down that road, a 2 bedroom unit is definitely going to be easier to find than a 3 or 4 bedroom apartment or house, so I know that's going to, bring the, average monthly price up a slight bit, and that is an inevitable consequence of what's happening in the market. But that is probably we rarely find students looking for a 2 bedroom unit. They're always looking for a larger unit. So maybe that's a way to look at it. But I think before anything else, get all your documentation in order. That is probably the biggest, positive tip that you can get people. So you can just, in one click of a button, send off everything that's required about you and about your friends who want to move into place. And, believe me, that'll make difference.
So do your homework. That's an important tip. But what I really take away from this as well is the importance of the bio. Anything that you can give, little bit extra. Let the agent know you so that they can make a decision about you. That's great. Listen, thank you so much. Best of luck to you and your team over the coming months. I think we have a busy few months ahead in the rental market in Dublin. So my thanks to Igor Fleming, Managing Director of Dublin Lettings. We need to take a quick break. Stay tuned.